G'day guys and welcome back to the Boundary Riders YouTube channel, and today we are starting our season-long series reviewing every round of the AFL season. Now of course today we will be reviewing the match simulations that happened over the past week, but when the real stuff starts, this will be the place for all the analysis of the round that was and the 3-2-1 votes for the second ever Boundary Riders medal. Now, in case you are new to the channel, last year we gave votes to players in every single game of the 2023 season, and at the end of the regular season we did do a live stream of a live medal count where we saw Zach Butters take home the inaugural Boundary Riders medal. Now, we did do these votes on the podcast last year, but we have decided to reveal the votes on this new review series every single week in 2024. But guys, now that we've done the lore dump of this series, let's take a look at the round that was. And just before I forget guys, we do have an AFL Fantasy League and AFL tipping comp that you can join right now. You can see in the top left hand corner the codes that you can use to join those respective leagues, and if you somehow do beat me and my brother in these respective comps, the winner will be receiving a $125 gift voucher to the AFL store, and the winners of each of these leagues will also receive a free print from our AFL design company called BR Designs. But let's start way back earlier in the week with the Demons and the Tigers. Now, I won't spend a lot of time on this because we did talk about this on the podcast, but we do have to really thank AFL Central over on Instagram because they have been posting the statistics of the game so far in the match simulations, which I really think is a letdown from the AFL that they didn't have someone at least giving some sort of statistics for these games. So really appreciate him giving the statistics for all the match simulations and getting help from the AFL community as a whole. But in the end, we did see Melbourne win in the first four quarters of this game, winning 117 to 94. Oh no, sorry, Richmond won the game 117 to 94 in the first four quarters, and then after that they had like the VFL game going on, and they still continued to add the scores, and Melbourne just lost by 2 points. To be honest though, I'm not going to take the scores too much into account here because it was just a match simulation. But AFL Central, like I said, has recorded all the statistics. We saw Jack Viney get a 35 disposal game, played really well, 104 fantasy points. It will be interesting with the retirement of Angus Brayshaw. I don't know if he would have been like in the CBAs this year for Melbourne anyway, but I do think Jack Viney had a pretty good year last year, and I wouldn't be surprised if he has a pretty good year AFL fantasy-wise, and in-game, obviously, for Melbourne as well. 104, great performance from him in the match simulation. We also saw Trent Rivers. There's been a lot of talk about him playing midfield for Melbourne this year. He had 26 touches, 9 marks, and 107 on AFL Fantasy, so really good performance from him. And I think he's about 600k in AFL Fantasy, so that would be a good choice. We saw Caleb Windsor, the new draftee for the Demons, have 22 touches, 80 fantasy points. Really good performance from him as well. He received a pretty heavy knock, so big welcome to him to AFL football. But yeah, he looked like he was not out of place at all. We saw Shea Bolton have a good performance for Richmond. He had 21 touches, 92 fantasy points. The only marker against that is the fact that he did kick 4 goals, and I'm not expecting him to average 4 goals in the season, like throughout the rest of the season. And there has been talk as well that he's going to be playing predominantly forward this year, so a little bit of a question mark on him on fantasy points. But for Richmond fans out there, I think he could definitely be an All-Australian forward in the next couple of years, depending on how Richmond perform as a whole. We saw youngster Tyler Sonsie for Richmond, 17 touches, 2 goals and 87 fantasy points. Good to see the young Richmond players getting some minutes, and hopefully they can perform this year. We saw Christian Petrarca ease into it a little bit. He had 25 touches, 2 goals, 87 fantasy points. Thomas Dow had 24 disposals, only 64 fantasy points, but I think he's pretty expensive in AFL Fantasy. If anyone's playing Supercoach, though, could be an option to pick up. That's basically all the players that I wanted to take a look at AFL Fantasy-wise and otherwise in the performance of that first game. So a couple of standouts there. But yeah, at the end of the day, we'll see how they go in the next preseason game. They will be playing this week. Next, we got North Melbourne versus Collingwood. So North Melbourne won the match simulation. Again, I'm not taking a lot of account into this. I'm not exactly saying that North Melbourne are going to be, Titan beaters this year, but good performance from them. And I think Collingwood had quite a few players out, so you can't take too much into account for that game. But good performance from them nonetheless. One player I do want to point out, though, Harry Sheezel had a massive game for Collingwood, against Collingwood, sorry. He looks like he's just not going to have any second-year blues at all. Obviously, it's very early, but this does kind of see like an Errol Goulden sort of vibe, how he had a very good couple of match simulations and preseason games before last year, and we saw how good a year Errol Goulden had for the Swans. He had 42 touches, and 38 of them were effective disposals. Massive performance from from Harry Sheezel, and a total of 141 fantasy points. Massive performance. I think he's just going to keep on growing for North Melbourne. So even though I'm still... We'll have to see how he goes in the next game for me, but he could definitely be a Nick Dacos, Errol Goulden sort of year for Harry Sheezel coming up. Looking at some other players in that game in particular, we saw Tom Powell have a 32 disposal game, 97 fantasy points for North Melbourne. Good performance, kind of a up and down player so far, so hopefully he can really grow into this year for the North. We saw McKercher, the top draftee for North Melbourne, 25 touches, big performance, 81 fantasy points. I think he's a lock really at this point. We saw Tristan Cherry have 21 touches, big performance from him, as well as 30 hit-outs. 20 of them were effective disposals. That's insane, really, I think, for a ruckman. And 105 fantasy points for him. So he's definitely a decision to make, depending on if you go with Max Gawn in the ruck or Tristan Cherry. I kind of think Brodie Grundy's that lock at this stage. We saw Paul Curtis get 16 touches and 4 goals for North Melbourne, so that's a really good performance from him. John Noble, who was left out of the final series for Collingwood in 2023, had 22 touches and 17 effective disposals as well. Massive mark he took in one of the highlights. That was a really good take. He had 81 fantasy points. I'd be a little bit cautious on him, just thinking about it now. Luke Davies-Uniacke eased into it a little bit, 22 touches, 4 tackles, 88 fantasy points. So not the biggest game from him, but like I said, it's only match simulation. I think he'll grow into it. And Nick Larkey, honestly, Coleman Smokey. If he wasn't playing for North Melbourne, I think he'd be the outright favourite. He kicked 5 goals in this game and only 13 touches. But obviously, he's all about, low disposals, high impact with his goals up forward. So Nick Larkey in for a big year. Dylan Stevens, new recruit for North Melbourne from the Swans, had 25 touches and kicked a goal. Interesting to see how he'll go. And we saw Pat Lipinski, 16 touches, 5 marks. Good performance from him in the match simulation for Collingwood. But like I said, I think Collingwood rested quite a few players for this game, so we'll see how they go in their next pre-season game for Collingwood.
BR Designs, our new design company, is your one-stop shop for your AFL prints. We have designs for every single team, so make sure to head down to the description below, head to BR Designs to find your desired AFL design. And make sure to use our unique features with our design of scanning your QR code will actually bring up on your phone the highlight that you have the design for. And don't forget at checkout to use code
FOUNDER for 15% off your purchase for the next 48 hours.
So getting quick, guys, let's get back into it.
After that, though, we get to the Swans versus GWS. Sydney won this game against the Giants after having a pretty slow start. They went on to win 112 to 86. So Sydney, I was very interested to see as a Swan supporter how the front three tall forwards would go. As last year when Buddy Franklin did retire, Sydney didn't really have that... They didn't really have those three working together perfectly yet because they didn't really have a whole preseason. They kind of expected Buddy Franklin to play through it, but play throughout the season. So they kind of struggled. But I think this is going to... my brother did watch this game and he did say that they performed pretty well. Amadi was a little bit lower than the other two, but Logan McDonald and Harry McLean played quite well. On the side of statistics, Chad Warner was probably best on ground in this game. Had 29 touches, 2 goals, 110 fantasy points. Little bit of a concern on him. Just he had a good year last year, AFL Fantasy, but wasn't massive. I actually think he could be really big this year. Just wait and see on that one for anyone out there. But I think he had a bit of a down year last year, so I think he can definitely respond from that. Lockie Whitfield had 25 touches, 94 fantasy points. He could be anything this year for the Giants. Tom Green. My brother was pretty happy to see how he performed, obviously. He's thinking a Brownlow Smoky. I don't even think it's a Smoky anymore at this point. I think he's up there with a Brownlow favourite. Had 30 touches, 5 marks, 24 effective disposals, which is really good for a clearance player, and he had 92 fantasy points. Stephen Cornelio had the 27 touches, pretty good performance from him. Tom Papley played through the middle quite a bit for the Swans in this game. He had 21 touches, 8 marks, 91 fantasy points. I saw Connor Idun, really underrated small defender for the GWS. He had 21 touches, 80 fantasy points. Brodie Grundy, back to his best. He's going to be massive for Sydney this year. And honestly, it could be a smoky for the All-Australian. 17 touches, 22 hit-outs. Was massive against Kieran Briggs in the ruck. 101 fantasy points. Absolute lock. Jacob Ware, interesting, was out for a lot of last year through injury. He had 19 touches, 83 fantasy points. Could be locking down that wing spot early for the Giants this year. Braden Campbell had a good game, 18 touches, 5 marks. I think he's really going to grow into this year off halfback for the Swans or off the wing. He got 79 fantasy points. And then we saw big goals for Aaron Cadman, who obviously was the number 1 draftee last year. He got 4 goals along with Jesse Hogan. And I believe that Logan McDonald did the same for the Swans. So that's interesting look at those sort of games. I think that, like I said, we'll see how they go with the match, with the preseason games in the week coming up. But yeah, good performances from both of those teams. Probably got out of it what they needed from the coaches. They probably were happy with what they saw in that game. After that, we get to Carlton versus Geelong. Carlton lost this game 56-73. This was a shortened game as well, but Geelong got over the line. Again, I think Carlton had quite a few players out here. They didn't play their best team, I'm going to be honest with you. We'll have a quick look at the statistics of this game as well. So, Paddy Cripps had 19 touches, 1 goal, 5 tackles. Didn't have a big performance there. Brian Myers had a pretty good performance though, 18 touches, 7 marks and 2 goals. So obviously he was a goal assist specialist, so the Lionel Messi of AFL football. I still love that joke. Aaron Chera had a pretty good performance, 19 touches, 3 marks and 3 tackles. Nick Newman had the 21 touches in a shortened game, is pretty good performance. Max Holmes looks like a very interesting role for him. Looks like he may be actually playing off half back for the Cats this year. Had the 18 touches, 3 marks as well. We saw Ollie Hollins, obviously brother of the new recruit Elijah Hollins and top draftee, had 14 touches and a goal. And that's basically all the statistics we have for that game so far. So yeah, pretty shortened game, this one, I believe. I think this is one of the shorter match simulations, so we'll see how they play in the next game. Not too much to talk about from the game itself, but we did hear news throughout the week that Sam Walsh has a niggling back complaint, and he may not even be ready for round 1. He seems pretty unlikely at this stage that he'll be ready for opening round, so we'll see how that plays out. After that, we get to Brisbane versus the Gold Coast Suns. In the first 4-quarter period of this game, we saw Brisbane win 102-55, and then the Gold Coast caught back in the next couple of periods. I think it was only a 6-period game. They lost by 1 point, the Suns, 127 Brisbane, 126 the Suns. But we look at the statistics for this game. Sam Flanders, in the 3-quarter period he played, he scored 61 fantasy points, 20 disposals, looked really, really good in the midfield. As basically one of the only one of the forward options for AFL Fantasy this year, he had a pretty good performance, I would say. I think Kadeem Coleman is a massive get now. He's only 600k in AFL Fantasy, scored 91 points up to 3-quarter time. He looks like he's going to be the main distributor out of halfback for the Brisbane Lions, and we saw in the final series how good a performance he had. So I think he's just going to go bigger and better in 2024. Zach Bailey also scored 91. Ryan Lester scored 87. Dane Zorko scored 78. Dunkley 77. Matt Rao was one of the highest scorers for the Gold Coast Suns. He scored 76. This is over three quarters, by the way. He scored 76. Toot Miller and Connor Butterick scored 73. Connor Butterick's an interesting look at. He's quite a high price. He's about 500k. With a couple of games that he played last year, averaged about 73 in a couple of games. But he could be anything for the Gold Coast in 2024. Damien Hardwick looks like he's going to utilise him quite a lot. Looking at the rest of the statistics, though, we saw James Tunstall score 69. Harris Andrews scored 68. Alex Sexton and Jared Witt scored 61. Alex Sexton is an interesting one as well. There's been a lot of talk of him playing off half-back. There is a concern, though, because neither Will Powell or another Gold Coast halfback did not play in this match simulation, so his points very well could be disrupted from this, and I think he's kind of a wait and see how his role plays, especially in the next preseason game. We'll see how he goes, as well as if Will Powell plays. So that's kind of the look at for that game. Moving on to the next couple of games here, we had the Western Bulldogs up against the Hawks. The Bulldogs went out winners 108-83 over the Hawks. Now, this game was a bit split up in terms of players. I think Western Bulldogs kind of split their teams in half for that 4-game period. I think they played a lot of players. I think they played 2 separate games. So the likes of, I think Bontempelli wasn't even in the first game. So AFL Central only has the statistics for the first game, which is fair enough. I mean, the fact that this guy got the statistics, pulled them all together and just posted them on his account, and it's really hard to do, so for him to do that is really appreciative. Nonetheless, with the Bulldogs, we had Tom Liberatore score a massive 125. Interesting to look at him this year. Aaron Norton scored 104, had a really good performance up forward. Ryan Sanders and James Harms, both 101. Now, obviously, with the likes of Bontempelli not playing in this team, McRae was out, I think, through injury still, so I think Ryan Sanders is an absolute lock for me personally. But James Harms, a little bit of a wait and see. He's going to be a forward mid, so he could be placed in your forward line early in the season, but I still think it's a wait and see on his front. Sam Darcy had a massive performance for the Bulldogs, scored 97. We have Riley West with a 77. Nick Caulfield, obviously recruited from the Saints, pretty low price. He scored 76. We have Lockie McNeil, 65. Johannesson on 64. Bailey Williams on 60. And then we have Liam Jones on 58. Looking at Hawthorn's side, young Hawthorn player Henry Hustwaite scored 104 points. That is a massive performance from him. The only thing I will say, though, AFL Fantasy-wise, he was about 400, 500k with a couple of games that he played last year. So you have to wait and see how good a performance he will be early on. Massimo D'Ambrosio scored 86. Scrimshaw, 84. Cam McKenzie, draftee from last year, 84. Jack Ginnivan, obviously the recruit from Collingwood, scored 78. Blake Hardwick with 70. Jarman Impey with 68. McDonald with 65. James Sicily with 64. Ned Reeves with 60, and then Mabior Chol with the 56 fantasy points. Mabior Chol did go off with an injury in the game, which is very concerning, but he did come back on. So not much of a concern there for Hawthorn players. And with the off-season, with the pre-season that they've had with a lot of injury concerns, it is good to see that he did come back on. After that, we get to the Saints versus the Bombers. The Saints smashed Essendon. Not a good look for the Bombers, but again, it's only a pre-season game, so take it with a grain of salt. Good performance from Max King, kicked quite a few goals for them. Great to see Tim Membry back for the Saints. Obviously, last year was out of the elimination final through not being left out. He had some concern off the field. I don't think it was ever reported, which is fair enough. I think it was some mental problems, but at least he's back and he looks like he's in some good shape. He had a really good performance with the 15 touches as a tall forward. I thought it was really good. Riley Bonner was a really big standout for the Saints. He had 28 touches, so obviously he was picked up as a delisted free agent, I believe, from Port Adelaide. So really good to see him performing well. Jack Steele had a good performance with the 24 touches. 15 of them were handballs, though, so a little bit of a flag on the AFL Fantasy front. Rowan Marshall, 19 touches, had a massive year last year in the ruck, so we'll see how he goes. I think he was a little bit hard done by. I don't think he made the All-Australian team, but yeah, I think he's a little bit hard done by to miss that. Seb Ross had the 17 touches. Mason Wood had the 20 touches off the wing. Wanganeen Malira had the 23 touches. He's going to be big this year for the Saints. Now moving down to the Bombers. I think one of the only real standouts in this game was Nick Martin, I'm going to be honest. Looks like he's going to be playing off a half-back role for the Bombers this year. I think that's going to be big for them. He had 29 touches. He was brilliant. Not many other contributors, though. Likes of recruit in Xavier Dersmer only had the 14. Merritt only had 15. Harry Jones only had the 4 touches. Jake Stringer, who played in this game, had 5. Elijah Cheetahs had a pretty good performance. He only scored. He had 17 touches. Looking through right now, Jay Gresham had an okay performance with 16 touches. Basically, that's really all the big talking points from the Bombers game. Like I said, I wouldn't be too concerned yet, Bombers fans. There were quite a few players out as well. Even their top draftee, Nate Caddy, was out. So I think we'll wait and see how the Bombers perform in the next preseason game. And even then, we'll wait until like the first couple of rounds to really look at how the Bombers are going. But yeah, not the best performance from them so far. After that, we get to the Port Adelaide game down at Alberton. I was streaming this game, and I thought it was actually a pretty good match simulation, to be honest. In the first 4 quarters, it was a draw, 93-93. But after the 6 periods, Port Adelaide went out winners 138 to 116. But basically, from the 4th quarter to the 3rd quarter, a lot of players were either rested or left off the ground for quite a long period. So this game with AFL Fantasy and statistics-wise, it's pretty hard to look at it because their match on-field time was quite low because a lot of players were getting rotated. I think it was unlimited rotations, so there was a lot of players getting rotated in and out. Nonetheless, though, Rory Laird is probably the best player on the ground, especially for the Crows. He had 95 fantasy points, 26 touches. He was brilliant. Riley Philthorpe, I do want to quickly mention, he had a massive performance in this game. Only had the 14 touches, but he was big around the ground. Took a lot of contested marks earlier on in the game up forward. Kicked a couple of goals. And when he went pinch hit in the ruck, he was really performing quite well. It looked like as well, just on face value, he looked like he's bulked up quite a lot this preseason. So I think that's really exciting for Crows fans. Jordan Dawson only had the 15 touches and a 66 fantasy points. But like I said, I only think he spent like the equivalent of half a game on the field. He had quite a lot of time off the field. And I think a lot of that as well, he played up forward. So don't be too concerned about that. Isaac Rankin, interesting. He played quite a lot of this game through the midfield. I don't know if that's just for match simulation, but If he plays through the midfield this year, he could be an interesting choice. Riley O'Brien had a pretty good performance in the ruck. With the 11 touches as well. And the last player I want to mention here is Ned McHenry. He only had the 11 touches, but especially in that third and fourth quarter period, had a really good performance for the Crows. Only 52 fantasy points, so it doesn't look like a lot, but he was around the ground quite a lot and making a lot of contributions for the team. So, interesting look at him for Crows fans out there. Maybe he'll grow into something this year. So, I think it's kind of an interesting year for him. He does need to grow quite a bit. So, we'll see how he goes, and he started all things well for Adelaide. After that, we look at Port Adelaide. Connor Rozee was probably their best player, in my opinion. He scored the 91 fantasy points. Ryan Burton was quite good as well with the 15 touches, 73 fantasy points, and kicked a couple of really nice goals. Dan Houston was pretty good for the Power as well, 17 touches. Pau Pepper was their third best fantasy scorer. I don't think he'll be playing at the start of the season. I'm going to be honest with you with that hit. Jackson Mead is one I want to talk about. Obviously, has been in and out of the team through last year. Was a pretty high prospect when he got drafted. But I think he had a really good performance in this game. Now, granted, there were a couple of players out for Port, like Willem Drew, who couldn't play in the midfield. So, Jackson Mead got a little bit extra time in there. But he looked quite clean below his feet. Was pretty good with the ball when he had it. I think he could be a chance of an early start for Port Adelaide this year. We'll see how that plays out. And Zach Butters, another good performer from him, but he looked very clean on the ball. But obviously, this is a preseason game. He didn't have a lot of touches. He had the 21, 54 fantasy points. I still think he's going to have a massive year, Zach Butters, and maybe could be a back-to-back Bounty Riders medalist. We'll have to call it after him if he wins it 2 years in a row. I think that's fair enough to say. But then to the last match simulation game of the weekend, or week that was, Fremantle versus West Coast. Freo went out winners, 98-46. The West Coast Eagles were very inaccurate though. They kicked 5 goals, 16, so maybe they could fix that one up there. Nonetheless, looking at the AFL Fantasy scores, this was only from the 4-quarter period. Jordan Clark was top scorer with 97, Luke Ryan with 91, Caleb Sarong in the 3 quarters that he played at 89. He's going to be big this year. A lot of people have been talking about that. Elliot Yeo, interesting. He had 78 points in a 4-quarter period. Andrew Brayshaw in a 4-quarter period scored 77. Liam Duggan with the 65. Witherden with the 58. Matt Johnson, interesting one. Obviously was a sub for quite a lot of last year. He had 54 points in a 3-quarter period. And Hayden Young, 53 in a 3-quarter period. I'll be interested to see how Hayden Young goes. He had a pretty poor game from what I can hear. A lot of reports and that. So I still think he'll be okay. I've got him in my fantasy team in defence, but kind of a wait and see on that front. He looks like he's going to get a lot of midfield minutes. So I'm still keeping the faith in my opinion, but we'll have to wait and see. Nat Fyfe is the one I want to talk about though. He scored 45 points in a half of football. Massive performance from him. However, he did have 20 touches, so he could have very well had 80 points. He could have, but he had a lot of handballs. So I've got him in my team at the moment, Nat Fyfe for AFL Fantasy. But for Freo fans out there, he looks like he's going to be playing a lot more midfield time, which I personally wasn't a big fan of hearing. I thought that they should be going with youth and should be playing him through the forward line. But he is a 2-time Brownlow medalist. If his position is the midfield, I think you have to give it to him, in my opinion. And Harley Reid, obviously the top draftee. I think everyone knows who Harley Reid is now. He had 27 points in a 4-quarter period. He did give away 3 free kicks. I wouldn't be too concerned about this. Maybe on an AFL Fantasy point, maybe. But for West Coast fans out there, I wouldn't be too concerned by this at all. And I'm sure they're not. I'm sure he's just going to rise and rise in the next couple of months going into the season. So we'll see how he goes. And the last report here is Ruben Jimby only scored 4 points in a 2-quarter period. But he did come off injured. So hopefully everything's all good there. West Coast really can't afford to have any more injuries. I think that's safe to say. But yeah, guys, that's basically the review of the match simulations, AFL Fantasy review, and players themselves. Make sure to let me know down below how you feel about the match simulation games. I will just quickly mention that the footage that they showed of these games was absolutely deplorable. So I really hope that next week when they go back to the main showings of them, it's not just some guy recording it off his Nokia phone, that we get some better footage of these games and that they do have someone reporting on the statistics, because there shouldn't be some AFL fan, AFL Central, I know he's a big Instagram place, but even he was saying it's ridiculous that no one is reporting the statistics on this game other than fans. So hopefully we get some more in-depth analysis from reporters and stuff over the next week of match preseason games. But yeah, thanks for watching today. Like if you enjoyed this review, and subscribe to the channel. We're really growing this one. Really love to hit 1,000 subscribers by the end of the season, but first step is to hit 500. We're about 90 subs away, so hopefully you enjoy this video, and yeah, we'll catch us all next time.